okay. Didn't do anything to you.
So
Um,
sorry
Sorry,
about that,
we
folks.
replaced you with my cat. My cat's
Oh,
here
that's
now.
okay. That's
yeah.
okay.
So the
I'm
cat's
glad to
gonna
be.
lead the rest of the podcast. And you can just kind of like kick back and moderate.
Sounds good. Yeah. So sorry about this, guys. This VOD will be split up into two. So if you're listening to the first part of the podcast or watching the first part of the VOD, this is going to be the second. We just had some internet issues. I love Chicago internet. It fucking rules so hard. Anyway, you were just wrapping up talking about Lei Kugo, and I think you were
Mhm.
gonna go into the
Yeah. So
yeah.
we're
So
shifting
sorry
over
about
to
that.
Edo.
Sorry about
No,
that.
no, no. That's all right. We as soon as we realized what was going on, we stopped
Totally.
to give you some time to get back on. So, yeah, Edo was pretty it's a little bit of a departure in the sense that like it's not a traditional, it's not traditionally about the indomitability of the human spirit. Oboro's story is like a little bit more about his infallible loyalty. And that kind of like extends into the scenario itself. Once you meet the optional character, or well, he's not optional, but once you meet the other character that's involved in the mission, things kind of take a turn. And yeah, I mean like just sneaking around, you're not really like an unbeatable monster of like a protagonist. You're just a guy, basically. Maybe a little bit more talented than other just guys out there, but um Oboro is like very much, against the odds, doing this thing as, like a mission towards the people that he's born to serve. And that extends, like I said, into sort of like the choice that you get to make at the end of the scenario, um, where you get to decide whether or not you want to leave your tribe or your clan in order to serve who ends up being revealed as Ryoma Sakamoto, who's like a very, very
I
famous
was
Japanese revolutionary. Just like
uh
incredible little turn.
and
Um,
my tagline for this period is,
mhm.
what if Sakamoto was British? Because why is the
Such a
VA
good call.
talking in like in English first of all, but with received pronunciation is just. I mean, I guess if they, yeah, I guess if Japan, if folks who are Japanese were going to be speaking English, it probably would be closer to received pronunciation. But like, why is it just? It's just so funny to me, man. It's so
Yep.
funny.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. It was a really good touch. Um, but yeah, I mean that sort of indomitability isn't really like the standard of what you would think, like, always getting beat down and getting back up kind of thing. Um, but it's more of like an undying loyalty thing where his loyalty isn't ever really tested, but it's always steadfast.
Right,
And
right.
that's something like it's just one of those like brilliant human qualities. Like if you know that what you're doing ends up being right, or like even if what you're doing doesn't end up being right, you kind of like have that conviction in your heart the entire time, and that's like a driving force for his story.
Yeah, like a loyalty, like an unflinching, unwavering loyalty, which
Hmm.
I think carries over into Wild West because Sundown's character is he's sort of an anti-hero, right? Like he's just like a neutral
Yeah.
party, right?
Oh, can I can I drag us back to Ito a little
Oh
bit
yeah, 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 yeah.
on that? So you wanted to talk about the indomitable spirit. I think that part of having Ryoma Sakamoto in this scenario is to, and talking about the twilight of Edo Japan, is to talk about the indomitability of the Japanese people during
Yeah,
that
yeah, that's a
time
really good
and
point.
the
Yeah.
Hmm.
transition over to the Meiji period and dealing with all the things that happened there and the stuff that was still able to be done after Ryoma's death in real life, which
Hmm.
happened very early in his life and via assassination. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely the just textual part of that, but there is also the uh, metatextual
Hmm.
context
Yeah,
that sets that up.
that's
Yeah, I
definitely
mean,
intentional too. It's
yeah,
100%
absolutely.
intentional. Like more
The
so than just a
implication,
but more so than just like a piece of pride or like a nationalistic thing or whatever. Than
hmm
that, I think it
yeah.
definitely is supposed to be metatextual.
It's a very like highlight. I mean, when you think about like Japanese history, it's a very, very well covered point. And I think for a lot of reasons, obviously, like it has a lot to do with Japan's assimilation, or the beginning of Japan's assimilation into Western styles, cultures, etc. But it also has to do with like just a massive highlighted period of turbulent change.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, the implication there is that like the black ships were the ships arriving at the end of the story, right?
Hmm.
And the black ships are that was Commodore, I think his name is Matthew Perry, which is hilarious,
Yep.
but
Yes, it
um
is.
but like that was Commodore Perry basically forcing the gates open on Japan and telling them like, hey, you got to trade with us now. Um, but that was like a huge, huge thing, and that was the beginning of a lot of change for Japan. And Japan, this is highlighted by Sakamoto's monologue at the end of that. But he talks about, about the wave that's coming in the future that's going to change everything, and just whether or not you have
Right.
the conviction to stand up and help him with that. I don't know if you all chose to go with him, but I didn't. It's like kind of like
I
it's
didn't
sort of like a
either.
break between tradition and progress. That was like a
Yeah.
really
I
interesting
didn't
way to end
either.
that story.
I
I
didn't.
didn't, but I did so I was filming footage for my video, and the
Hmm.
second time I decided to, yeah, let's go with it just so I could see something different as I'm doing it.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say I did in the Super Famicom, and then this one I didn't. So
yeah. But I thought
fucking
it was really interesting. And I assumed that the reason that Sakamoto got assassinated IRL was because I chose not to go with him.
yeah, that's 100%
So
why. Yeah,
that's on me. But
few people
that's
know this history hack.
it happens. But yeah. So Wild West. You were talking about Sundown being an anti-hero.
Yeah, yeah. So he's sort of an anti-hero, at least in presentation. Like he's, your Clint Eastwood man without a without a name, not the,
Hmm.
the Sundance Kid ass.
Yeah.
Um, but the whole the thing that is obviously omnipresent in this chapter with him is that you do good because you want to, not because it's a moral choice,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that like that's my fucking that's my adage on life, man. Is like you do good because you want to, not because it makes you virtuous or like makes you a better person or whatever. You do it because you just
Yes.
fucking want to, not to like meet some like moral quandary or
Yeah,
whatever. And I think
exactly.
that that's like such a cool aspect of the indomitable human spirit
Hmm.
because it's just something that's just there. Like it goes against the like I guess if you look at modern philosophy and like things being more nihilistic now, it goes against that like kind of pessimistic view of people are innately bad. Like it just
Hmm.
says people are like even a guy like this, even this man just does it
Yeah,
just because.
right. And I think like there's a lot that has to do with a lot of that gets put into perspective when you find out the big turn at the end is that like his whole story is that of somebody who was like an amazingly talented skilled gunman who basically attracted too much attention. People ended up burning down his home, burning down his town, killing all of his friends and stuff, and he decided that like the guilt was so much that like he needed to just like leave. And what, he like put a bounty out on his own head.
Yeah, yeah, just to just for chaos.
I mean, presumably, you say chaos, and I think this is really funny because like I didn't really think about this until I was like, we're kind of going over notes for today. But presumably, I wonder if he put the bounty out on his head to attract the kind of people that would
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
like
That's the
terrible enough
intent.
to go chase it after him.
That's the typical Western. That's like in every Western is that
Right.
concept of that dude who does that. Like,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think at least that's my read too. And it's supposed to be, like a fun little, like almost stage play of a chapter too, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
framed in that way totally, like more
Yeah.
so than even maybe even the far future, where
Hmm.
it's like it's framed in such a way it's like this is the setting, like you could literally make a play of this fucking chapter. And I
Yeah,
think
for
it's all,
sure.
and I love like spaghetti westerns. I
Hmm.
love like the 90s shift in westerns. If you haven't,
Yeah.
this is definitely Unforgiven as hell, man. If you haven't seen Unforgiven, please watch Unforgiven. That movie rules. So it's
So
like
once
I'm really
one
partial to this one.
it's a really good chapter. One sentence tagline for this one: do good because you want to.
Hell yeah, brother.
That brings us to the present day. Um, this one I think is probably one of the more literal sort of like examples of indomitability. Um,
Get good.
it all stems from Masaru's drive to learn and get better. Yeah. Absolutely. And his like his entire struggle is sort of like the very basic, I'm just trying to cement myself as the greatest. So there's that aspect of indomitability in that like he's just a shithouse kid who wants to get good and learn everything he can and become the ultimate fighter. And I think that's like a really fun sort of like intermission kind of chapter. Because it's not really as heavily
Yeah.
narratively focused. And it only really takes some like significant points towards the end, particularly like the intro to the Odio fight. Um, because all of a sudden sort of like establishes consequences for all the things that you just did. And not necessarily consequences of your own. It's just like, well, these people actually weren't all of that, and they actually were trying to teach you these things, not so much like just trying to kick the shit out of you.
Well,
At least that's
it's
kind of the read that I got off of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I see that because it's. I mean, that's why he's the blue mage, right? Like he's supposed
Yeah,
to learn from these opponents and not just
right.
in like. But I think that like positing them as just teaching tools is maybe a little simplistic, or maybe I'm just
Yeah, I
overanalyzing
mean,
a very simple chapter. But
well,
um,
there's like a big difference between the two approaches too, because obviously Masaru wants to learn. He wants to pick up these things. And Odie Obright, who is his foil in this chapter, not necessarily any of the opponents that he comes across,
right,
um, Odie doesn't care. He kills all of them without remorse or without thought. He just like murders them because they're weaker than him.
right.
And even if Masaru ends up winning each fight, I mean, ostensibly that would imply that they are weaker than
Then
Masaru just
Masaru,
by
yeah.
default. But the approach is so different, and I think like Masaru is obviously like he's got a good heart by comparison.
So
And that sort of like leans
yeah.
back into the indomitability thing.
Well, this story is just Kickboxer basically, or even Bloodsport.
Yeah.
It's Jean Claude Van Damme ass stuff, and the whole point of that is like it's almost like a kind of bootstraps boomer
Hmm. Yeah.
ideology of like the which I don't think it's like meant to be this in the game, but like it is a little bit of that where it's like you said, these people are weaker. Therefore, they lose and I win, and somebody has to survive. Like a sort of like
Hmm.
what's wrong, Snowflake? Don't understand survival of the fittest kind of thing. But I think
Ugh,
it's like that to sort of
social
be
Darwinism.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's fucking Ayn Rand, yeah. That's-
Yeah.
but no, I think it's supposed to say something along the lines of like in this field, like in this particular thing, violence begets violence because it's a martial arts tournament or whatever,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
like somebody is going to use it for bad. It's kind of similar to the
Hmm.
Imperial China arc, right? Where like somebody is going to use a tool, martial arts, as
Yeah.
violence.
Hmm.
Muscles don't kill people, people kill people.
Right.
Bottom line. I don't know.
I mean, there is a lot of, I think, narrative or thematic similarity between the Imperial China chapter and the present day chapter, but it obviously like it takes those things different places.
Mhm.
Um, One, like you said, is a little bit more kind of like basic and focused on the cycle of violence, and the other one is more about like, using that power for good. Um, yeah,
And sometimes the strong are just evil because they're strong, right?
yeah, yeah, power corrupts.
Hell yeah.
Um, yeah, so he kind of like I think in a sort of like reverse, like a bookended Earth and Heart Shifu kind of way, Masaru kind of turns into a legacy for all of these people that he's come across as well. Um, Especially if you take the time to actually learn all of their skills and stuff.
Oh yeah, remade shit.
Any I'm gonna field you guys for a one sentence tagline for this one.
Hmm. You got anything else to hip, Rio?
Um,
I got one.
my cat wants to say
Oh,
something. I
you know
can't
what?
make
That's
it.
good,
Perfect.
actually.
That's a perfect one for this
Mm.
chapter.
There's coming up.
Cat reveal.
No, she just wants to get my attention. I've been spending too long with y'all.
The
um,
computer.
but I think that um, being the strongest isn't just about the physical.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the mental game is there too. And that's on full display in that final boss battle too.
Uh,
Hmm.
the mental, but also the emotional.
Hmm.
Oh, also,
And
that
yeah.
AI pattern does the same thing every time. It's a very specific pattern. Like, and I
Obright?
think, yeah, and I think that
Mm.
that's intentional. It's supposed to underscore like big head, no thoughts. You know.
Mhm.
So I think that's interesting. Uh,
That's the tagline for this one? Big head, no thoughts?
no. Get good, get bitches, stop crimes.
What?
Yeah.
How is that even?
What
I
does he
prefer
get?
the
The
previous one.
silent purr.
Um, yeah, that I think what that leaves us with like just a couple more with
Hmm.
the near future.
The
Um,
futures and then the middle.
and then the middle. Uh Akira was my favorite character. I think I'm
Nerd.
just gonna put this out there now. He's like the coolest.
Mhm. Hmm.
Nerd.
Just from the most basic anime bullshit level, and also like he looks fucking cool,
He
man. I don't know
does
what to
look
tell
cool.
you. But like Akira's whole story is one of like tragedy, right? Like he lost his father. His father basically was like looking into this organization. He eventually through after throughout the story he's losing people close to him. He loses Matsu, his like mentor-ish slash like best friend. Um and he also comes across the revelation that like Matsu wasn't the person that he thought he was. Matsu actually had a direct hand in the death of his father. Like it's this really big like it's this really big emotional twist because it's all happening like right as Matsu's like finally dying, which is like it's so late into the story and you're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, like why does this all have to happen all at once? But rather than being like taken over by that pain, he uses that pain, he uses his emotion to finally like kind of break the barrier and be able to pilot the Steel Titan that he's been trying to pilot since like kind of early into the scenario, which I thought was really interesting. And like again, it's just another really, really good example of like the resolve of the human spirit. And he's using that power to protect rather than letting it consume him and take him over, which is going to be relevant very soon.
I think there is a lovely connotative ACAB message in here too, and I
Yeah.
also like the concept of like as somebody you used to be in similar circles to Matsu, like so many anarchists are cops or were cops, like
Hmm.
you are one like questionable guy in the sidewalk away from calling the police, right? Um, so I think that
Yep.
there's something interesting about that because I don't think this is intentional, but I do think like it goes to show you that institutions are always incestuous because like obviously Matsu having been a cop and then being a leader of street punks, like there's history there, there's connectedness. Even if one rejects the other, it's still
Well,
there's.
Matsu wasn't actually a cop.
Oh, he was the
Matsu was the one of the gang leaders, and he got disillusioned
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
after the stuff with
Right,
Akira's dad happened. But I
right.
mean, I don't deny that there's definitely some like anti-establishment
Yeah.
sentiment throughout the story because obviously like the drug gang was also connected to like the military, and there was a lot of that
Yeah,
collusion
that's
going on there.
yeah.
So um
That's right. Yeah.
the ACAB still stands.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Um
fuck
yeah,
Akira's
but
dad.
Yeah, honestly, after Akira's dad died, did we see a single police officer the entire time for
no,
the
we were
entire
done with
game
that.
when all of this was happening?
Mm-hmm.
No, there's no one to protect the people.
It's true.
Not that, the police in general protecting people aren't legally obligated, at least in the US.
I love radicalized Rio, man. That's my favorite arc. It's so
Art-
good.
Live Alive, how Live Alive radicalized me.
Yeah.
It does not trace back to Live Alive. I guarantee you that.
Not just
As a
being
history major, I
alive.
can understand how that wouldn't have been connected to Live Alive. Being alive alive?
But yeah.
So
But
yeah, you chose Akira as the protag for final chapter.
He
I
was
think
my
it's a
final
good time.
protagonist.
Good
Yeah.
time to talk about that. So I picked Lei as my final one.
oh, nice. I did Sundown because
Yeah.
Sundown's cool, and I hated recruiting him in the Super Famicom version.
That is fair.
No,
Yeah,
he
he's
still
kind of a pain
sucks
in
to
the
recruit,
ass.
but it's not
He
as
was kind of a
bad.
pain.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
yeah, I mean
picking
that's
Lei makes Pogo easier though, because Pogo
Oh yeah.
he just
is
insta
all
joins.
about.
Pogo loves the
Because
bitches.
if you pick, he does a little bit. Because if you pick, okay, so I have one little anecdote that I thought was funny. So I
Mhm.
farmed the Coke bottle because I didn't use it in the Super Famicom version, and so I got the Coke bottle, and I'm like, oh, this is broken. I'm just gonna like use it for grinding or whatever. And then because in this new version, that your people scale when you have to fight them in the final chapter,
Yeah.
and there's no way I was winning that fight against Pogo without grinding. He was like so much higher level. Everything was missing, and I'm like, I'm just gonna use a Coke bottle, bro.
Bucket
Or
Coke bottle.
not Pogo. Obero, because Obero was like
Ah.
level 18 because I was grinding in the demo.
Oh
And
my
then,
god.
and then I was like, yeah, there's no I can't possibly kill him, so I had to use the
Yikes.
Coke bottle. So anyway,
So
sorry.
yeah, that leaves us with a couple of things. Middle Ages and the distant future. The distant future. Oh man. Again, such a dense chapter. And I think
Oh man.
like, we've kind of finally come full circle on this one because we talked about this really, really early on in this podcast episode. But um
Early.
it's I mean, like, so obviously our protagonist is Cube. And Cube is sort of like a blank slate in that he's only really imprinting, he's having like
You're
imprints
imprinting
of
on.
yeah, we as a player are imprinting on him. But also, I mean, a lot of it has to do with Kato, and I think Kato is like sort of like
Mhm.
the shadow main character of this scenario. Because Kato is sort of like the driving force for a lot of the developments of the chapter. Both in making like the eyes through which we even see all of this stuff to begin with, but also just being like this paragon of love for both like his creation and people. And like, he takes on like almost like a, I don't know, I would almost go so far as to say like a messianic suffering, um
Oh yeah.
watching everything break down around
Yeah.
him, because he's so driven to like help people, and he wants to be like a positive force
Yeah,
on
but
that
he's
ship.
kind of a pussy nerd.
Yeah, true. But I mean, what are
Jesus
we?
was a pussy nerd.
And here are Oh my
It's just-
god, y'all! Really? This is what happens when we go over this time allotted.
we we start to get delusional after the next like 40 minutes.
Sorry, no, you said
here I
messianic, and I
thought
had
that-
to make
yeah.
that comparison.
No, but I don't really think that like undermines at all what I'm trying to say.
No,
here.
no, no. I was just fucking around too.
Um,
But he needs something to give him. Like I say, pussy nerd, but what I really, but like there is an element of like something is
anybody's-
lacking, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like Kato's character in this story is like kind of doesn't really understand social situations super well. It almost seems like creating Cube and being focused on robotics and whatever almost seems like a way to sort of compensate for what he's lacking, right?
I mean, well, that's why we play as Cube and not as Kato
He's
for the
Kato,
scenario.
right.
Because it would have been very easy for us to just play as him. But like you said, there's something missing there, and there's like the point of connection ends up being Cube. Because it's sort of like an intermediary between us as a player and the character of Kato, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, like there's so much to dissect there. Like Cube as like sort of a child of humanity, gets all of the good basically with none of the bad.
Oh, yeah.
But you get to watch all of the bad unfold around you. The just all of the weird interpersonal drama on that spaceship over the course of like 2 hours. And I mean, really, we only get to see like the last snippet of everything,
Yeah.
and are kind of just left to muse on what the potential history might have been between everybody,
Dude, it's so
other
good.
than a couple small snippets.
So good, dude. It's like Alien mixed with Dark Star mixed with The Thing. Like there's just so many Star Trek references, Lost in Space. It's such a like, and this is something to be said about all the chapters, but this pop culture just crystallized, man. And like, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm stretching this a little too far, but like just the whole concept of like using these big works of fiction as inspiration to underscore these themes, I think is really fitting rather than just like taking pop culture influence just to take pop culture influence.
Right.
So,
And I think
Yeah, so they took ideas instead of just quotes or moments, like from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which you didn't mention among there, but definitely had an impact
That's
on
big
this.
with
yeah, it's
prehistory.
just a
The
huge
gods
part
must
of
be
it.
crazy with the Coke bottle, dude. That took me out, man. Because I don't think I really played Live Alive Translated until recently, and so when I was going through the game in Pogo Scenario and I saw the Coke bottle, I was like, "Is that a reference to the gods must be crazy?" And then I was like, "Yeah, that has to be. It's so good.
It's gotta be,
man."
right? Well, yeah, I mean, like so much of, I feel like this was another project that's like, it's such a passion project. So much of their, and I mean that like in the sense that not really like video games are their passion, but you could see just every bit of influence from all of these like monumental pop culture things sprinkled throughout the game. But it's like, you can tell that the takeaways weren't the superficial for the people that are putting those things into the game.
Totally.
Everything was deliberate, and I say this a lot about 13 Sentinels, because that's another game just crammed full of these like pop culture references and sort of like little nods to other sci-fi projects and things like that. But there's like there's a very big difference between inserting these for the sake of inserting them and inserting them for the sake of like bolstering your story or bolstering the themes that you're trying to convey. And I think both of those games do a fantastic job of doing that. I think, to its credit, I think Live Alive actually does a better job of doing that than 13 Sentinels, though I love both. But that
Knew you were
brings
gonna get to
us, yeah, that brings us to the Middle Ages, and the RPG influence kind of finally coming to a head, right? Orsted.
What's our sentence summary
our
for
one
distant
liner.
future? We also missed it for near future, but I think distant future is how can we screw over Huey?
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. What about near future?
I think that's some plenty good. Near future,
Anime was a mistake?
giant robots kick ass.
Okay, yeah, that works too.
Yeah.
Um, that leaves us at the Middle Ages. This is the last section here. Orsted, you know, we've talked about sort of the journey of Orsted and what happens to him and the extensive breakdown and a lot of those things. And it doesn't quite line up, you know, the idea of indomitability doesn't quite line up with the positive approach that every other scenario takes with it. The subversion is just rampant throughout this chapter. And it finally culminates with Orsted, you know, having his monologue moment with Stribo and Alistea just dead in front of him. Uh, but you know, instead of it being like sort of this affirmation, it's more it feels like he's admonishing the world around him for what it's done to him, and like his indomitability is a more personal one than you know like somebody like Akira. Um, he instead of you know just doing what the world wants him to do and dying, or what Strivo
Right.
and the princess wanted him to do, um, he kind of like rejects the notion that he's just gonna sit there and lay down and take it anymore. And he finally turns. And I thought that was a really interesting subversion in the sense that like it still sort of exemplifies that indomitable spirit, but he takes it and uses it for evil,
Yeah.
as opposed to doing, you know, just the thing that other people did, like, you know, kind of brushing it off. And I think a really good contrast point to this is Sundown, because Sundown kind of goes through a very similar thing where he loses everything
That's
around
why I
him.
picked him as my main character, man.
Hmm.
That's why he fucking slaps.
But instead of, you know, instead of taking that and turning it into like fuck the world, I'm gonna become the dark cowboy, he decides to go out on his own and, you know, kind of make a difference, without necessarily being thanked for it. So he has like a very thankless role.
And his whole
Um,
existence is to test the indomitability of the human spirit, right? To say that you
Orsted, yeah.
cannot, yeah, you cannot be put down, brother, you know? And I feel
Hmm.
like even his relentless attempts when he's clearly failed so many times to a naked guy with a lizard on his crotch and like some random ninja LOL XD pirate and you know like an anime lord, you know, like he still gets wrecked and he still continues. So I think that
Yeah,
like
over and over and over
over
again,
and over
he
again.
tries.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's, yeah, I mean that's a pretty good place for the story to wrap. I mean,
Yeah.
we go back and forth about this pretty much throughout every era. And finally we get to the point where we find out why sort of everything was kind of coming down.
Hmm.
And yeah, like I said, I think his like refusal to just lie down and take it, is a really, really strong sort of highlight, even if it kind of splits in direction from the rest of the cast.
Totally. Yeah. Um.
Orsted's oh well, we already said
Oh.
Orsted's one-liner was I hate bitches.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But man, there was like two things I wanted to highlight, or two things I wanted to go over. One of them, and this is just like anecdotal, there is a scene at the end of Cube's story that like even just like talking about it is getting me a little choked up. But like after everything's happened, you like you have to make Cube go get the coffee and give it to Darth.
Oh yeah.
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 Like, oh my God, that is like that was like the perfect moment for me. And that was when I was like, oh, I think this one might be my favorite story. I
Yeah.
think
I think
Akira's
it
my favorite
is.
character, but the far future, the distant future is like the best scenario in the game.
You
Just
see,
because of how it all broke down.
I'm not sure I feel that way, and I think it may be because of the order I went through them. And I
Mm.
said this while you were briefly indisposed, Joey, but I started with the distant future. scenario. That's the
Oh, I
very
think
first one
Kelly
I
did too.
completed.
Kelly did as
Yeah, and
well.
I think that was a bad choice on my part. But
It was my last one in the
It was
original.
my last one. I don't think it was like a I don't necessarily think it's a bad choice, but I think when you look at the structure going into Orsted's and the final chapter, I think it makes way more sense to either have that first or last.
Yeah.
If it's first, then it kind of acts like Orsted's chapter kind of acts like a bookend, like a thematic bookend,
Hmm.
to what gets established in Cube's chapter. And if it's last, then it is a very direct juxtaposition of like the two sort of clashing ideals of humanity. Um, so I think really the only caveat is like just don't play it in the middle somewhere because I think it
Yeah,
makes way more sense to play either first or last.
I really think it depends on the person, right? And I think it like Rio, because you're probably going to finish the game you probably would have finished the game anyway, no matter who you picked, right?
yeah, of course.
So I feel like that at the end of the day, yeah, because it's like you think about these things critically to the point where you're even thinking about this. So I don't know. I think it depends on the person. Like
Mhm.
casually, I think like most people, if I were to recommend this to somebody who's not super into RPGs, I'd be like, think about which one of these you want to play first. Think of which one sounds the
Yeah.
most interesting to you. I don't
Hmm.
really recommend prehistory for people who aren't into RPGs, though. So
That makes
like,
sense.
Yeah.
I think if there was any one chapter I would have to recommend that people do first, it's probably Edo.
really,
Um, yeah, it's
Ah.
kind of like one of the more like I don't know how to put it. It's like one of the less committal chapters to do because you don't really have to like you don't have to do the pacifist route. You don't have to do like an annihilation route. You basically just go through it.
yeah, but you don't
Um,
know that the first time going in. You don't know like
yeah,
when
Yeah.
he
I mean,
gives you
yeah,
this
but yeah, but you get to just
opportunity.
do it.
Yeah, but
You're not
like,
really like you're not really beholden to any sort of route in that
yeah,
one. Whereas like I think with a lot of the other chapters, there's like little bits or bobs that like kind of uh inform how you're going to be playing it. Like I think Sundown's chapter is really good, but it's not something I would start with personally. Just because you end up very quickly in like a time management scenario.
mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like a weird out there mechanic for somebody who's like trying to ease into a game. Like suddenly, I don't think putting a time limit on somebody like right away is a good way
Right,
to like
right, yeah.
introduce somebody to
Sundowns,
a
I don't
game.
think is a good start either.
Um,
Yeah,
I would say like Akira's is probably more recommendable as a first chapter because it's like it is one of the more straightforward RPG-ish leaning chapters.
yeah, especially in
Um,
the remake, it's a lot less. It's a little bit less.
yeah,
The difficulty was nerfed considerably in that chapter, and
yeah,
it didn't feel like you needed the parts or the armor as much in it, and
yeah,
the final boss isn't even something that you need any loadout for.
yeah. You just roll
Mm-hmm.
up.
Just
And
roll
I
up.
think the mind reading thing is a really cool hook for people to get into,
Mm-hmm.
like as a first chapter. And I think everything else is kind of like all the other chapters kind of like laser focus on their concept. Um, to the point where like you can tell that those are just like the RPG building blocks, so to speak. Like we talked about earlier with Imperial China, there's the training element to it, not really a whole lot else. You're like very laser focused on that. Obviously the Masaru chapters all combat all the time. Um, I think Edo and Near Future are probably the two that give the most like balanced sort of like exposition and gameplay style. And everything else is like it's laser focused and you'll probably enjoy it, but I don't think it's like the way that you get hooked on the game.
Yeah, I think I would say Imperial China is my catch-all for like first one to start with.
Hmm.
Even though you can kind of dink yourself a little bit, but if you like spread out your training
Yeah,
too
yeah,
much, but at the same time the game gives you options if you do because you can just grind and
yeah.
the last boss is quite easy.
Yeah.
even regardless. And like the way that the leveling system scales, like if you're behind, it doesn't take that much longer to get ahead. So
Hmm.
it's to me that one was very straightforward because you were just it's like you have an overworld, you're going around, you can fight encounters in the map, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't really think it matters too much. I think like the joy of this game is just kind of like seeing seeing the shit,
Yeah.
seeing things like discovering the joy of discovering it, I guess.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, it was a fantastic way to get into such an old, like a, a classic beloved project.
hell yeah. Um, I think this was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed talking about this with you guys. I'm sorry if it went on for a little long. Anything that you guys want to say or anything before we start wrapping up? Rio?
No, I don't really have more to add that would, just lead us right back into longer
More
discussion
discussion.
and bring
Yeah,
this out even further.
I feel that.
Yeah, Joey, you already know how into the weeds I like to get about all this shit, so I think
mm,
it's probably for the better that we start to wrap, just because I know if I'm given a leash any longer than like 3 feet, I'm fucking going for the hills. So
the
Oh,
ADHD
I'll
brain.
I'll leave off something on this. I really want to see what Live Alive's impact the 2022 version is in 5 years. I want to
Same.
come back and talk about it and see how it worked out.
I think this
mhm.
game has a once it goes on sale a little bit more, which maybe it will. I don't know. I feel like people are gonna. This is gonna be a game that people. It gets a little bit of a resurgence, especially if there's a lull in Nintendo releases in the next year or two. So, which it
I think
probably
we
will
got
be.
a I think we got a really good I think the game came out at like a really good time to kind of like whet the appetite of a lot of people that were into RPGs. So hopefully this continues to get talked about. Um, I know obviously kind of didn't really do itself any favors coming out a week before Xenoblade Chronicles 3 did. That
Mhm.
kind of wasn't ever really in the cards to begin with. Things changed on the fly, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that like it was a very good appetizer sized RPG for people that were kind of like on the fence about, playing the game or even just like I want an RPG, but I don't really feel like I can commit to the time. Something like Triangle Strategy might do.
Then you got the best boy.
That little guy right there.
You got the best boy. That's all I'm saying. Uh, so don't forget, we also have Bahamut Lagoon. We also have Treasure Hunter G. We also have Treasure of the Rudras. Um,
Do you want HD 2D remakes of all this?
no, although I think I
Oh,
do. No, sorry, go ahead.
people have been calling for HD2D Chrono Trigger. We don't need that. I'm gonna
No,
say that
Mm-mm.
now.
no way, no way.
Thank you.
Although Bahamut Lagoon is that actually wouldn't be terrible HC2D, but
Mhm.
still nah. But come on, man, bring Bahamut Lagoon. We deserve it. We've been good, Daddy.
Special
Uh,
shout outs,
uh,
since we're on the topic of Bahamut Lagoon. Special shout outs to Nier. Um, they got a shout out
Oh yeah, yeah.
in Live Alive
In
as
Live
well,
Alive, yeah,
which
that's
I thought
awesome.
was like a beautiful, beautiful little nod to somebody who had such a large impact on the fan translation community and um just games like Live Alive at large. So
Hell
thought
yeah.
that was really nice.
Um, cool. Anything else that let's plug y'all's socials, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks everyone for sticking with us this long, by the way. But Real, we'll start with you, man. Where can we find you on the internet?
yeah, so Twitter at com_Rio, and then YouTube CommRio. That's mainly where you'll find me on there. I am also, of course, in the Cerulean Skies Discord. So if y'all want to interact with me more in a format that's not as much social media, then that's the spot.
Hell yeah. Solstice.
Yeah, you can find me at Solstice AR on Twitter. I don't really stream a whole lot. I stream the occasional randomizer. Last thing of note, I'm just going to bring this up until the day I die, apparently. I did a 14-hour Golden Sun: The Lost Age randomizer playthrough, which is a lot of fun, and it was also excruciatingly long. So don't expect content that long from me in the future. But if you would like to follow me on Twitch, my @ is the same as my Twitter. So Solstice AR, no spaces, no punctuation. Other than that, I am also a frequent chatter in the Cerulean Skies Discord. Always around to talk games, TV, whatever I've got going on. Yeah, just come hang out, have a good time with us.
But don't ask Solstice for a 14-hour stream now.
Yeah,
13
yeah,
hours.
yeah, ask him.
I can
13
just
hours is maximum.
I can just type over the course of 14 hours, but I'm not going to be on camera for that long again. I've been playing a lot of Naraka Bladepoint with our girl Storm Cassie in the chat though.
I see you.
Shout outs. We've been kicking a lot of ass. And I think Naraka is a lot of fun. So play Naraka Bladepoint, come hang out in Cerulean Skies, and follow me on Twitter, I guess.
Cool. And as always, we do these podcasts on Wednesdays. So next Wednesday, we'll be doing another one. I don't know who the guests are going to be yet, but hopefully 2 people who have not been on CS stuff or have been on very limited CS stuff. Hopefully, would love to get you guys back on and talk about another game in great detail like this. Maybe a little shorter next time. But thank you guys so much for hanging out. This is a great talk. I think it's like a really interesting to explore the themes and mechanics of the game with you guys. Always a pleasure. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Jesus was a pussy nerd.